Chapter 10. Staying Awake Behind the Wheel. I recall a day that my trucker father-in-law and I were discussing how boring driving a truck for 11 hours a day can be. He summed it up perfectly by saying, "You can only pick your nose so many times." Now, you may not find that amusing and perhaps even a slight bit gross, but as a trucker, I find it absolutely hysterical. You see, I thought it was just me. It turns out that when you're in any vehicle all day, every day, the air-conditioned air that's blasting in your face really dries out your nasal passages. I was just glad to hear I didn't have a nose-picking fetish. Now, aren't you glad you know that about me and my father-in-law? So if you're considering driving a truck for a living, I'd advise you to get started on a strict finger exercise routine in preparation. But you know, my father-in-law's comment really doesn't do justice to how boring the long days of driving can be. This story should be a good idea of how boring driving a truck all day can be. One hot summer morning, I was driving along when nature called. Actually, nature screamed. I couldn't wait for a rest area, so I pulled over on an exit ramp to take a leak. Now, how often does a story start out like that? Anyway, I whipped out the goods and prepared to do my business. Apparently, an innocent little grasshopper didn't appreciate the shower I was giving it, so it jumped about 10 feet away. I shook the dew off the lily pad, got back in the truck, and continued on my way.
Is this guy bat crap crazy or what?
I heard that. Bear with me now. I told you my mind was a strange place to dwell. There'll be no doubt of that in a sec. It wasn't long before that poor little wet grasshopper popped back into my mind. Wow, I thought, he sure did jump a long way. I wonder how far that little sucker could jump in a typical day. Let's see, I can legally drive 11 hours before taking a break. I wonder how far a grasshopper could travel if he jumped for an 11-hour day. Answer, 15 miles. Here's how I know. I estimated that the freshly showered grasshopper could probably take one jump every 5 seconds. He needed to catch his breath, you know. Out came my trusty calculator. That's 12 jumps per minute, 720 jumps per hour, 7,920 jumps in 11 hours. So that's 7,920 times 10 feet each jump. That's 79,200 feet. Divide that by 5,280 feet in a mile, and boom, you got 15 miles. Now, I'll bet you didn't know a grasshopper could jump that far if he really put his mind to it, did you? Then again, I wouldn't have either had I not been so bored the day I whizzed on an innocent grasshopper. Still, it's one thing to think about something like that. It's quite another to actually be bored enough to do the calculations. So is driving boring? What do you think? See, I told you that if you tolerated the nice retarded man, he'd eventually get to the point. There was a point, wasn't there? Now, having said that driving a truck is boring, I still have to be thankful that I'm not staring at a cubicle wall all day. So there is that. There are groups out there that would like everyone to believe that every trucker on the road is driving fatigued. The Truck Safety Coalition is a trucking industry watchdog group. Within this group are organizations such as Parents Against Tired Truckers, that's PATT, which was started by people who had loved ones killed by tired truckers. There are links to the Truck Safety Coalition and the Parents Against Tired Truckers websites in the text version. Now, I feel for these people's losses, but the facts just don't justify their witch hunt. According to a study done by the FMCSA, of all accidents involving drowsy drivers, only 3% of the tired drivers were truckers. That means that 97% were drivers of automobiles. Gee, maybe in the future they ought to get their facts straight before they open their big yappers.
Well, sure. That's 'cause y'all truckers are hopped up on drugs.
Is that so? In 2001, an FMCSA study of random drug testing on truckers showed otherwise. There's a link to that study in the text version. That study showed that only 1.5%, that's 1.5% of truckers tested positive for drugs.
Well then, I bet they're drunker than skunks.
Bzzz, wrong answer. The same study showed that only 0.1%, that's 1/10 of 1%, had a blood alcohol level of 0.04 or higher. To put that last statistic in perspective, the national legal limit for a commercial driver's license holder is 0.04, while the average automobile driver's legal limit is 0.08. So if you as an automobile driver are legally drunk after 2 beers, truck drivers are legally drunk after 1 beer. In fatal accidents involving a truck and a death to 1 or more persons, only 1.4% of truckers were found to be intoxicated. For more information, statistics, and regulations on all things trucking, just go to the FMCSA website. There's a link in the text version. So I hope that clears up part of the bad image that truckers have when it comes to drugs and alcohol. Still, just because you now know that truckers aren't flying high all the time doesn't mean that driving for long periods of time, day after day, is easy. Can you handle the long hours of driving? I was the type of kid who could stare out the back window of our puke green, wood grain-sided Plymouth station wagon the entire 6-hour trip to Grandma's house for Christmas every year, so maybe I'm suited for driving. And what a fine automobile that Plymouth was. Seatbelts? We don't need no stinking seatbelts.
And if you don't get that play on words, check out the link in the text version.
Come to think of it, that station wagon looked a lot like Clark Griswold's pea green Wagon Queen family truckster from the movie Vacation. Too bad knowing that doesn't help to make the old Plymouth any less dorky.
And if you've never seen that movie, check out the link for a brief clip of that fine automobile.
So do you find it hard to stay awake when you're heading to Grandma's? If your answer is yes, then you're probably waiting for me to say that you should be looking for a different career. Sorry, ain't gonna do it.
Driving a car is different than driving a truck.
Well, duh.
What I mean is that there's just something about driving a truck that keeps you more alert for long periods of time. Maybe the vehicle is just so friggin' big that you're forced to pay attention. Maybe it's just not as comfortable to drive as a Lincoln Town Car. It's a mystery. Unfortunately, there's really no way to know if you'll have the stamina it takes to drive the long hours until you're actually doing it. It's a given that as a new driver, driving up to 11 hours a day will take some getting used to. It did for the evil overlord in me, but after a while, you do get used to it. Now driving to Grandma's house feels like a trip to Snack Attack for beer and Doritos. Or it would be if Grandma were still alive, that is. Sure, I'm groggy some days when I haven't slept well for some reason, but those days are few and far between now.
And when they do come, I just get some caffeine in me. I find it especially effective since I rarely drink coffee. I honestly don't know what normal drivers do on days when they're tired, since their bodies are already used to loads of caffeine. I guess that's where those 5-hour energy drinks come in.
Now, I do realize that not everyone is a road warrior. For some of you, riding in a car for any length of time is as relaxing as sniffing the happy gas at the dentist's office. My mother-in-law is one of you. If you're in a quiet car with her for more than 30 minutes, she'll have her forehead plastered against the window, showing everyone we pass what her molars look like. God love her, but I wouldn't want that woman driving a truck any more than I'd want to pass a kidney stone the size of a kiwi fruit. So if you're one of these people, please consider a nice calm career in the post office. Okay, bad choice there. Even for those of us who don't have a problem staying awake, there are several ways to pass the long hours of driving. These include the CB radio, CDs or MP3 players,
Podcasts,
audiobooks, AM and FM radio, satellite radio, and your imagination. Let's cover each of these separately. Many truckers talk on the CB. Maybe you will too, but as Austin Powers would say, that's not my bag, baby. There goes my horrible British accent again. You know, I don't even have a CB handle. I figure there are enough drivers out there with cheesy CB handles like Midnight Runner and Lone Wolf. If I was forced to have a handle, I suppose I'd use my Indian name, which is Mighty Wind from Below. But I can't since I don't have an ounce of Indian blood in me. It's funny how that works. If you've never talked on the CB before, you'll quickly realize that you've just entered a whole new world. The first time I turned it on, I couldn't understand a word that was being said. Part of that is just the lack of clarity that comes from a cheap CB. Another part of that is because they speak a strange language. What the heck is a chicken coop? What's a seat cover, a plain white wrapper, and what the heck is a roller skate? Okay, in listed order, a chicken coop is a truck weigh station, That'll be explained later. A seat cover is a woman in a car, usually with shorts or a skirt on.
Yeah, men are pigs, I get it.
A plain white wrapper is an unmarked police car, and for the grand finale, a roller skate is a small car. If this sort of stuff fascinates you, there's a link in the text version for a great website on CB slang. Yet another part of this confusion comes from trying to understand the slurring that passes as speech. Sometimes just trying to get a reply is a chore. This is where women excel. A woman talking on the CB will never be ignored. Whether that attention is good or bad depends on the person answering. They may or may not be a pervert. As for getting a reply, I never had much luck, until we did some experimenting. I typically speak with a fairly clear voice, so I was always boggled as to why I couldn't get many responses when I needed some information. One snowy night, as we were getting ready to leave a truck stop in Laramie, Wyoming, I turned on the CB and asked in a clear voice, "What are the westbound roads like?" Even after numerous attempts, no one would answer me. The best I could get was some smart aleck who said, "They're snowy, driver." Now you may think that answered my question, but it didn't. Every driver knows that we're looking for more information than the blatantly obvious. Heck, I could get that much information by just looking out the friggin' windshield. I got fed up and decided to experiment. First, using her normal voice, the evil overlord asked the exact same question over the CB. She got numerous replies with tons of information. Here's a representative example.
"Hey, little lady, you got snow-covered roads with a little bit of patchy ice over to Rollins, then you're looking good to mile sticker 122, just east of Rock Springs. After that, you got snowpack again until the Utah state line. Be careful and drive safe."
Now that's information, and she had it confirmed many times over. Now it was my turn. I turned on a raspy-sounding southern drawl, queued up the mic, and tried to sound like every other trucker that I'd heard over the CB waves.
"How about you, eastbound? Got your ears on? What'd you leave behind you?"
Guess what? I got the same information that the evil overlord had received without even one smart aleck remark. So there you have it. Ever since, I always turn on that voice when I need some information, and I always get it. I feel like a complete idiot while I'm doing it, but hey, what can you do? Feel free to give the CB culture a shot. If you miss the way your 6-year-old twins argue at home, just turn on the CB.
"Shut up, stupid. You shut up, stupid. Who you calling stupid, stupid?"
Yes, seriously. That's not an exaggeration in the least bit. I swear on my nephews' lives and the Holy Bible simultaneously. It's really, utterly ridiculous. I'm truly amazed that grown men can act like that. I say men because I've never heard a woman trucker do it. And we wonder why women treat us like we're idiots. The first time I heard this petty bickering, I chalked it up to a couple of immature guys. Turns out there are enough immature grown men out here to fill up Madison Square Garden. Turn on the CB in any traffic jam and you'll likely hear the same thing. If you don't, just wait 2 or 3 minutes and you will. I've tested this theory out. Sometimes it takes a bit longer than a few minutes, but eventually some moron will call another driver stupid and they'll get into a childish argument. It's unfreaking believable.
And if it isn't that, it's some dude saying,
"I ain't got no panties on."
"No, I don't understand either."
Unfortunately, the CB radio is a necessary evil. Occasionally, shippers and receivers will tell you to wait in your truck and they'll call you on your CB when a dock becomes available. Thankfully, many of them are starting to realize that most drivers have cell phones nowadays. I'd much rather pay for a minute or two of cell time than I would listen to the annoying CB chatter for the 2 hours it takes to get a dock assignment. Sometimes you'll need a CB to talk to truck stop personnel when you're getting your load weighed. They also come in handy when you run into snow, rain, or fog and you want to find out what the roads are like up ahead of you. If you've got a flat tire that you're unaware of, it's possible with 18 of them, another driver will let you know via the CB. Perhaps more important, you can find out where all the bears, aka cops, are hiding out. All of these are useful and necessary reasons to have a CB. In fact, if you're going to drive a truck for a living, I strongly urge you to make a CB radio the first thing you buy after your company assigns you a truck. I take that back. Buy a truck atlas, that's a map, first, then buy a CB. Despite all its uses, I still find the CB utterly annoying. Here's just one example why. Early in our trucking career, while creeping along in a traffic jam near Chicago, I turned on the CB to find out what the problem was and what lane I needed to be in. Surprisingly, no one was arguing. We wondered what it would take to get it started, so in a quiet spot, the evil overlord said in a quiet, menacing voice, "Eastbound hates the westbound." Well, with that, we figured out how little was needed to start a CB war. All hell broke loose.
"We hate you too, you bleepity bleep bleepers."
The war waged on as we turned off our CB. I mean, really, why would the eastbound traffic have any reason to hate the westbound traffic? Neither side was moving, so it couldn't be that. I think they just needed an excuse to start acting like immature idiots. All CB talk doesn't have to be bad, though. Another time, we found ourselves stuck in construction traffic on I-290 in Metro Chicago. Someone told a joke. Then someone else. Then someone else. I got a few in. This went on for about 30 minutes. Every time another driver pulled up alongside us, we'd look at each other and laugh even more because we were all laughing. Usually road rage is associated with traffic jams. That particular day, it was laughter. That's certainly not the norm, though. Granted, good jokes are a matter of opinion. If you're a stuffy old prude who doesn't enjoy a joke now and then, you would have been mightily offended. Did I mention that the language on the CB is not for the faint of heart? Well, you know now. If you don't want to hear it, that's what the off button is for. As you can tell, I don't talk on the CB much. It's not that I'm stuck up, it's just that, as I've said before, I don't have a lot in common with truckers, even though I am one. I don't give a hoot about where some driver has been this past week or what new CB gadgets he just got. Dare I say it, I don't even care about NASCAR. What? Oh my God. You heard me right. Now, if they all had front-mounted flamethrowers, that'd be a different story. Now, having said all that, every now and then I turn on the CB for whatever reason and find someone interesting to chat with. I've had some good conversations with other drivers before, and it can really pass the time. Early in our driving career, we hooked up with a friendly old-timer during a snowstorm in South Dakota. He helped us along since we hadn't driven in bad weather very often. So the CB doesn't have to be all bad. Many drivers live on the CB radio and love it. And just because you need to have a CB doesn't mean you need to drop a fortune on one. If you plan to talk on it all the time, you probably will eventually. If you think you'll only use it out of necessity, you can pick up an inexpensive one that'll do the job for $50. That's what we started with because we knew we'd rarely use it. It eventually crapped out on us and we bought a better one for $100, which is still a fairly cheap one. We've had it ever since. If you work for a large trucking company, you probably won't even have to buy antennas. Most fleet trucks already have antennas installed, and you just have to plug your CB into it. I haven't had to buy an antenna yet. Once again, if you plan on using it a lot, you'll probably want to invest in some good antennas so you can get better reception. Drivers who are really into the CB world can have rigs costing hundreds of dollars once they add all the gizmos to improve their sound and signal. It's your choice. Just buy the cheap one until you find out if you're a CB junkie or not. All things considered, I'd rather occupy my time with more fun things, like pulling out my chest hairs one by one. There's also music CDs, or if you're tech savvy, the wonderful little iPod. Music was made for the road. Just listen to Steppenwolf's Born to be Wild, and your foot will be mashed to the floor. Unfortunately, I've got nearly 300 CDs, and I never know if I'm going to be in the mood for Mozart, Megadeth, or Mil Tillis. What to do? I used to carry our entire CD collection in one giant CD case, just to make sure that I had what I was craving at the moment. The bad part about that mammoth case was trying to search through it to find a particular CD while driving down the road at night, or any time of day for that matter. I have to admit that it wasn't a very safe practice. If you can afford it or already have one, an MP3 player is a much better option. Any brand will work, but the Apple iPod is by far the best-selling MP3 player on the market, and for good reason. If you've never owned an Apple product, well, then I guess you just can't understand until you try one. And yes, I'm an Apple junkie fanboy, if you couldn't tell. If you'll be using a simple MP3 player, you're going to need a computer to rip all your CDs to an MP3 format and transfer all the music, audiobooks, podcasts, photos, and video to your iPod. That process can be a bit of a pain, but once it's done, you've got everything on one little device. Even better, most smartphones nowadays have ways to get all this media onto your device without ever firing up a laptop. Except for that ripping CDs part. There's just no way around that. Sorry. With the 80 gigabyte iPod version that I have, I've got over 7,000 songs on a device the size of a pack of cigarettes. And it's only half full. Of course, that sucker isn't cheap, but it's a heck of a lot safer than fumbling in the dark while testing the rumble strips on the shoulder of the road. A brief word about podcasts. Nearly every time I mention the word podcast to someone, I get a blank look. Come to find out, not everyone is a tech junkie.
So what is this podcast thingamajig?
A podcast is nothing more than a radio-type show that you can download to your MP3 player and listen to it anytime you want. Most are audio only, but there's a growing number of video podcasts available too. Granted, you shouldn't be watching video podcasts while you're rolling down the freeway, but they're still great to have when you've got some downtime. Podcasts can last anywhere from a few minutes to a couple of hours. Some are daily shows, while others are weekly or monthly. They cover every subject imaginable, from your favorite football team, to knitting, to music, to science, and everything in between. If you can't find a podcast on a subject that you're interested in, you either have no interests or you have some really strange tastes. The easiest place to look for podcasts is on the iTunes Store. iTunes is a free music organization application that can be used on Mac or Windows. Yuck. I've provided a link where you can download iTunes. With iTunes open, click on iTunes Store and then click the podcast button. Start browsing or simply type a subject of interest into the search field. You can subscribe to most podcasts for free. Subscribing to a podcast will tell your computer when a new episode is available. It can also download it automatically if you've told it to in advance. So be sure to look into podcasts as a free way to fill the hours and hours of drive time. You might even learn something in the process. May I suggest a good place to start would be an excellent podcast called Trucker Dump. Yes, you may have guessed that it's mine. In each episode, I read the current blog post and answer reader and listener questions, all while trying not to be too annoying. You can find the Trucker Dump podcast in the iTunes Store, on the Stitcher and TuneIn Radio apps, on Podcast Gallery, and in the Microsoft and BlackBerry podcast directories. Or you can simply enter the following URL directly into your favorite podcasting app. That's http://abouttruckdriving.com/truckerdump.xml. Although an easier way to find it from your podcast app is simply to do a search for Trucker Dump. And I suppose if you want to be all boring and non-techy, you can just listen to the podcast from the website. Just find the episode you want to listen to and click the play button just underneath the title. And in the text version, I have included links to the Trucker Dump podcast, that is my website, the podcast in the iTunes Store, how to get the Stitcher and the TuneIn Radio apps, and a link to the Trucker Dump podcast on Podcast Gallery. And that direct link is in there too. It's kind of long. May want to go there for that. Next up is the growing success of internet radio. Most of you probably know that smartphones are basically tiny computers. This means you can access internet radio through awesome apps like iHeartRadio and Pandora. There's links to both of those in the text. This is called streaming. I've heard drivers say that they didn't need to buy music because they could stream it on their phone for free. Well, that's true. Sort of. First, it's not free. You're probably paying $15 to $30 or more per month for that data. Next, you need to be aware that most phone data plans have bandwidth caps. That is, you're only allowed to download so much data from the internet per month. Most people don't have any idea how big audio files are. And video files make audio files look like amoebas. Yes, I am aware that many carriers offer unlimited bandwidth.
But these are cell phone carriers here. They cannot be trusted. A few people that have been with the same cell carrier for a long time have grandfathered into truly unlimited data plans. But the majority of users have the unlimited plan that caps out at 5 gigabytes. Yeah, I know, 5 gigabytes isn't unlimited, but it is to the thieves at the cell phone companies. Lots of carriers do what is called throttling to satisfy their unlimited plans. Basically, they are giving you unlimited data, but what they don't advertise is that after the first 2 or 3 gigabytes, you're actually getting data speeds that are worse than the old dial-up method. So if you plan on streaming Netflix every night for a couple of hours, you're in for a surprise. I urge you to check out the fine print of your contract before you start streaming audio or video on your phone or laptop. If you do decide to stream, only do so in moderation and keep an eye on your data usage. Trust me, you don't want to pay overage charges on one of these accounts. I had to once. The price was my soul. Audiobooks are another great way to make your drive time fly by. Listening to stories or learning about a subject you're interested in is always a great way to pass the time. You can buy audiobooks on CD or cassette, but don't forget that you might also be able to check out audiobooks from your local library. Just keep in mind how long you can keep them checked out. The last thing you need in life is to have an obsessive librarian stalking you for late fees. Unless, of course, she's one of those hot ones who takes her hair out of a bun and shakes it in slow motion. That wouldn't be so bad. Again, if you've got a computer or a smartphone, there's a better option. Audible.com is a website with over 100,000 titles of anything you could possibly want. Actually, this number continues to grow rapidly, so let's just say it's over a bajillion titles so I can avoid future revisions. You can buy audiobooks individually, or you can subscribe and get so many credits per month. It's a great deal if you find you're starting to dig audiobooks. There's a link to audible.com in the text. Next up, there's the old standbys, AM and FM radio. As you well know, if you go out of range of an FM station and lose the latest Britney Spears song, it's no big deal. With today's radio stations, you know it'll be on another station in less than 15 minutes. As far as AM radio goes, if you've ever turned into an AM talk radio station, you know that just about the time the topic gets interesting is when you lose the signal. That's so frustrating. This is my least favorite option, other than the CB radio, of course. Next up is satellite radio. For those of you that were raised by a pack of wild boars and are just now joining civilization, satellite radio enables you to tune into one station and listen to it from Boston to San Diego. It even works in parts of Canada. So now you get to hear that great topic you would have missed otherwise and have access to countless styles of music. SiriusXM is the only real contender here. There's a link to them in the text. About $100 will get you all the hardware you need, although I found an accessory truck antenna for $60 to work better than the tiny thing that comes in the package deal. Just don't throw that little booger away. You can use a small antenna on your personal vehicle and just swap the receiver from your truck to your car when you get home. SiriusXM has more than 180 channels of music, news, weather, traffic, talk, comedy, and sports. You'll have every type of music you can imagine, from country western to classical and everything in between. I once heard a band that used African drum beats with Celtic instruments. If you can imagine it, you can find it. In the sports department, you've got all the biggies: NFL, NBA, MLB, NHL, NASCAR, and PGA. At the time of this recording, a subscription to SiriusXM is only $13 to $17 a month and is well worth the money considering how many hours of driving you need to fill. If you're thinking about team driving and don't know how you could possibly sleep while your co-driver is cranking the jams and bouncing down the road, here's a little tip. In order to let the evil overlord sleep in peace, I had to listen to audiobooks or music on a portable CD or tape player through headphones. Before I bought my satellite radio unit, I made sure that I could continue to use headphones with it. There's an audio out jack on the side that's designed to plug in an adapter that will play your satellite signal through your cassette deck. That jack just so happens to be the same size as the headphone jack. How convenient.
But I thought wearing headphones while driving's illegal.
It is,
and I've been pulled over for it twice. The reason headphones are illegal is because supposedly you can't hear what's going on around you as you drive. If someone honks at you to warn you of their presence, or an emergency vehicle is trying to get that heart attack patient to the ER, you may not hear them if you got the latest Linkin Park song cranked up to 11. Since I started driving, I think I may have held up an ambulance for about 15 seconds one time. At least it wasn't there the last time I checked my mirrors. So those situations don't happen all that often. Now, I'm in no way endorsing the use of headphones. There's my disclaimer, because it is illegal and you'll likely get caught every now and then if you do. See, I told you in the beginning of the book that I'd give you all the truthful facts about truck driving, and that's what you're getting. The Evil Overlord and I both wear headphones and have since we started driving in 1997, and we aren't alone. Lots of drivers do it.
Ooh, duck, there's a cop.
Here's how I got nailed. We truckers just love telling our cop stories, but unlike most of them, there's a purpose for these two. The first time I got caught, I was pulled over by a motorcycle cop on I-10 in Metro Los Angeles. I'm not sure if it was Ponch or John. You older folks got that. By the way, did anyone else used to play chips when you were a kid? My little sister and I used to argue who got to be Ponch, and then we'd ride our bikes in side-by-side formation all over the neighborhood and issue tickets from our little notepads. Ah, those were the days. Nowadays, you can't let your kids out of your driveway in fear that Chester the molester will run off with them. Isn't that sad? Anyway, back to reality. The cop had pulled me over for wearing headphones and coasting down a hill at 5 miles per hour over the speed limit. The Krispy Kreme must have been well stocked that morning because he asked if I wanted a ticket for speeding or headphones. Well, gee whiz, let me think about that one. Speeding is a moving violation and points on my license. I'll pass. The fine for wearing headphones was $100 and no points. I didn't even ask how much the fine for speeding would have been. I didn't want to know. Being California, they probably would have wanted my liver as a down payment. As he wrote up the ticket, I explained to him that with a co-driver who's a light sleeper, it's just not feasible to drive 11 hours a pop day after day in complete silence. Surprisingly enough, he agreed with me. Still, he insisted that the law is the law. He said to just try to refrain from wearing them in urban areas where I'd be more likely to get caught. The second time was on I-78 in Pennsylvania. A county cop pulled me over because he saw I was wearing my headphones. I usually take them off when I spot a patrol car, but this sneaky dude had snuck up beside me going through some construction. I explained to him why I wore them, just as I had to the California cop. He also understood and suggested that I should get some smaller headphones so they wouldn't be so visible. I used to use a huge set of studio-quality Sony headphones that make you look like Princess Leia. Sorry, I'm not going to provide a link here, because if you don't know what I'm talking about here, you're not worthy to listen to this book. Go away, and only come back when you get that reference. He even said that if I got a set with only one earpiece, that he didn't see why that would be illegal, as it's no different from when people use an earpiece with a cell phone. As a matter of fact, truckers are forced to do that nowadays anyway. Federal law says all truckers must use hands-free devices. I haven't had a cop look at me twice since this new rule. I think they just expect us to have something hanging out of our ears these days. And that one earphone thing is actually a pretty good idea if you listen to a lot of spoken word like I do. But if music is your thing, well, that just ain't gonna cut the cheese. How cool would Depeche Mode be if not in stereo? I shudder to think of it. I do only use one of my earbuds when I'm listening to podcasts, but I'm back to being illegal when it's time to crank the jams.
So you walked away scot-free then?
Hardly. He ended up giving me a verbal warning for the headphones, but nailed me for forgetting to stay current on my logbook. So here's what I've decided about wearing headphones. I know it's illegal, but if you've got a co-driver, it's worth the risk. At least for me it is. Since 1997, I've been pulled over twice for it, and have only been issued one ticket. I'd gladly pay $100 a year if it gave me the chance to earn $40,000, $50,000, or more, especially now that I couldn't survive without my iPhone. Even now that I don't have to worry about waking up the evil overlord, I still use headphones, mainly because the cheap speakers in most fleet trucks sound like Charlie Brown's parents are talking with a mouthful of muffins.
The difference is I've converted to a set of high-quality earbuds. They're a lot less visible, and like I said, none of the cops seem to notice anymore. I think I'd go bonkers without headphones, and I'm not sure I'd continue to drive. I very seriously doubt I could have driven a truck in complete silence all these years without my brain turning into oatmeal. Now, I'm not saying that wearing headphones while you drive is for everyone, but it sure has helped occupy our minds for more than 2 million combined miles. There is one more way to make your driving time fly by. Thinking. A person can only listen to so much music, and I wasn't always in the mood for a podcast, so that left silence. You can get a lot of thinking done in 11 hours. You know, really important stuff, like figuring out how far a grasshopper can jump. Okay, maybe not. Now, I'm no Socrates, but I used to spend entire driving shifts just thinking before my iPod started occupying my every waking second. Just pick a topic in your mind and go with it. What would you do if you won $60 million in the lottery? What would you do differently if you only won $500,000? If you could start any kind of business, what would it be? Wouldn't Jessica Simpson be the perfect woman if she were smarter than a fifth grader? How do commodity prices affect the stock market? Okay, scratch that last one. Our goal is to stay awake here. Still, the fun stuff could occupy my feeble mind for hours. You know, the funny thing about planning your lottery winnings is that your mind almost forgets that you're still as broke as you were before you whipped out the calculator to see how much taxes would be on $60 million. It was always a bit crushing to come out of my lottery stupor, only to realize I wouldn't be teeing off with Phil Mickelson anytime soon. Am I the only one with this problem? So you can see there are numerous ways to help you stay awake behind the wheel. And I didn't even mention the gallons of caffeine that some drivers consume. Still, you can't stay awake and drive forever. What about when it's time to hit the hay?